We're just going to give it a minute or so while people come in from the waiting room. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Okay, I think we're good to go.
Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Dalia Wassner, and I'm the Director of Latin American Jewish and Gender Studies, or LAJGS, which is a project of HBI at Brandeis University. LAJGS is the first such initiative that is dedicated to studying the Latin American Jewish experience through the lens of gender. In today's world, promoting exploration of minority identities, including those of Jews, women, and immigrants, is especially important. At the same time, if we consider that there are over 500,000 Jews who live both in Latin America and also who have emigrated in the last few generations from Latin America elsewhere, including the United States, Israel, Europe, and other parts of the world, we can appreciate that understanding American and world Jewry compels us to take Latin American Jews into account. As we get started, we invite you to use the chat function located at the bottom of your screen to let us know where you're joining from today. One of the benefits of Zoom is that you can be joining from anywhere. Please note that today's event features live automated transcription, which can be enabled or disabled by each viewer, and that's located at the bottom of your screen. It might have a CC for you. So now I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's conversation titled Israel in the Spanish-Speaking Media, the Case of Latina Entrepreneurship, featuring Leah Soibel and Susanne Althoff. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies, Brandeis International Business School, and that includes the Asper Center for Entrepreneurship, the Latin America Initiative, and the Israel Initiative, as well as the Brandeis Journalism Program. It also kicks off a wonderful spring season of LAJGS events, and we invite you to visit us online to learn more and stay engaged. Throughout tonight's conversation, I encourage you to send questions directed at me. I will be moderating a Q&A towards the end of today's event. And I see that people have been writing in from Florida, from lots of places in Massachusetts, from Colombia, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Montreal. So that's all very exciting to have everyone here. And so I will bring in to the room Leah and Susanne, who it is my honor and pleasure to introduce. Leah Soibel is a Hispanic American and Israeli. She has more than a decade of experience on the ground in Israel, the US, Latin America, and Spain, working with thousands of Spanish language journalists and opinion leaders from around the world. Leah established Fuente Latina in 2012. Prior to that, she had been at the Israel Project for 7 years, where she was among the original core staff in Jerusalem. She is a National Security Education Program Fellow, and she received an Arabic language certificate from the American University of Cairo's Arabic Language Institute. Leah mainly splits her time between Miami and Jerusalem, and we're delighted that she's here today. Joining us as well is Susanne Althoff, who is an assistant professor of publishing at Emerson College in Boston. Before she became a professor, she had a 2-decade career as a magazine editor. Her last post was editor at the Boston Globe magazine. Her book, Launching While Female, Smashing the System That Holds Women Entrepreneurs Back, was released this past October. It's based on more than 100 interviews that she did with women and non-binary entrepreneurs, and the book proposes ways to tackle entrepreneurship's gender gap. So Susanne and Leah, it is an honor to have you join LAJGS tonight. And Susanne, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dalia, for that introduction, and so exciting to see all of the locations popping up in the chat. Thank you everyone for joining us. And Leah, I'm thrilled to be spending this hour with you, talking with you. So I'll jump right in. You started Fuente Latina 10 years ago, as Dalia just mentioned. Can you tell us what inspired you to launch the organization?
Yes, that's a great opening question. Before I actually get to it, I do want to just say thank you to Dalia for organizing this event, and Berta Berikanskas from my team in Los Angeles for helping make this happen. And a big gracias to the HBI, all the co-sponsors, Fuente Latina's board chair, Claudia Dornbush, who's here with us tonight, along with our other board members of Fuente Latina, and for all of you for calling in. So what inspired me to launch Fuente Latina almost 10 years ago was really twofold. There was a void in the market from what I could see that needed to be filled, and there was consumer demand. When I was previously working at the Israel Project, I was working with foreign correspondents based in Israel from all over the world. And as a Hispanic Israeli, I was working very closely with hundreds of visiting Spanish language journalists that were parachuting in all over the world during breaking news cycles and conflicts. Hundreds and hundreds of journalists that were brought in from across Latin America and the United States by other organizations that were focused on bringing groups, including journalists and opinion leaders, to Israel to allow them to see the country for themselves. And what I saw was that these visitors would come, they would go back to their home countries, and as journalists, they never really wrote any stories or covered issues related to Israel, despite having visited and seen the country for themselves. And the reason for that wasn't a lack of interest, what I found. What I found is it was a lack of resources and access. And if you look at kind of the government sources that are available in Israel, dating back to 10 years ago, there were still very few websites in English, Arabic, some maybe in Russian. Today, they're in multiple languages. But back then, there was a desire on behalf of Hispanic global media to try to understand what was happening in Israel and the region. And me starting Fuente Latina actually coincided with a lot of what we're seeing of the Arab Spring in the Middle East. And there was an interest, a very keen interest on behalf of the Hispanic media. And as my role is always the point person between foreign Hispanic press and those wanting to cover in Israel what was happening, I started to see a significant increase in demand, calls, desire for experts, desire for background information. And with that demand, coupled by no one else was doing it, and the coincidence of that this was also a time when there was a lot of kind of awakening about the potential of the Hispanic vote in the United States and the need to communicate with this very key and core audience, led me to start Fuente Latina. From my kitchen in Jerusalem, I'll tell you, and totally independently and on my own. And went from one person at a kitchen table in Jerusalem to 7 full-time staff, 9 incredible executive leaders, hundreds of volunteers, and it's really quite incredible to watch how it has evolved over the years.
Wonderful story, thank you. Yes, kitchen tables around the world have produced some of the most amazing work. So you just now mentioned journalists having a demand for experts, needing people to talk to hear what's happening on the ground. And research shows that English language news stories most often quote men as experts. And I know that you and I have talked about this fact, and this situation is also repeated in media in other languages other than English. So I know that you are hoping that Fuente Latina addresses this over-reliance on men as experts in media. Can you talk to us about this?
Absolutely. This became one of my absolute pet peeves and goals when I started Fuente Latina. And what's so interesting about it is until we had this conversation, I never bothered to look at the statistics. but I was seeing it in my everyday work. And even when I was working at the previous organization, the Israel Project, I guess because I was in Israel and women there are much more representative in the media, that when I actually went to go to take a look at the statistics, I was shocked at how the lack of female representation in Hispanic media, in media in general, but specifically in Hispanic media. When I started Fuente Latina and I started to really, really pay attention to Hispanic news, I was absolutely flabbergasted. There were no women. There were no women. And we were doing multiple public opinion surveys. Other organizations had been doing this as well. And what I was seeing as a consumer of news and what we were hearing and seeing as these research results were showing was that Hispanics and news consumers in general, but particularly to the Hispanic market, the perception of Jews was male, Ashkenazi white, and religious. And when I would turn on the TV to watch a commentary about a story that was happening in Israel, being filmed in Miami or in Los Angeles or in Argentina, the experts were always men. And when I looked at the surveys of the perception of us, and that's not the reality of us, I made it my absolute goal as part of the work we do at Fuente Latina to ensure that we are training women and young people and getting their voices out there heard through the mainstream media. Because if we don't reflect, if we don't portray ourselves accurately, the media aren't going to do it for us. And we have to get out there. And Fuente Latina, thank goodness, has the platform to be able to put individuals and professionals in front of the media. So we do everything we can by empowering them for media training, social media training, but more importantly, finding professionals in a vast variety of fields all over the world that can speak on a number of subjects that are relevant to what the media are covering as they pertain to Israel. And even when they don't pertain to Israel, women from within the Jewish community, young people from within the Jewish community, although they're not talking about Israel per se, they're still representing the image of the Jewish community.
Great. So how are you measuring your impact? How do you know that the trainings that you're doing and the other work that you're doing is actually moving the needle?
So there's a couple ways, and this is such an amazing idea, and I'm not saying it because we're doing it, because it made me think about our work in other ways that I never thought about our work. So for example, one of the key ways that we've measured our success is our work has actually resulted in two TV Emmy Awards for major U.S. Hispanic networks and one Associated Press Broadcasting Award. And I love those awards because they just prove that what we do works if we are empowering Hispanic journalists to win such accolades. But I never thought about it till today is that all three of them are women. All three of those that won awards are non-Jewish Hispanic women. And I don't know why it never dawned on me, but I just find that the coincidence is so amazing. And those type of awards are just one way that we are able to measure our impact. The demand for services as well that have increased significantly in content. Just this last year, the Tribune Agency, which provides all the content and syndicates content for Chicago Tribune, Philadelphia Inquirer, Los Angeles Times, Miami Herald. They signed a contract with us to be able to syndicate our content and our opinion pieces and videos through to their newspapers across the United States. That coupled with the demand of the journalists always wanting to go to Israel, unfortunately, not at the current time, but there's a long waiting list for when the skies open back up, coupled with the new closing of newsrooms, the transition of everything that's happened over the last year due to COVID. Newsrooms have many less journalists than ever before. Deadlines are much tighter, resources are much scarcer, and that leaves an opportunity and also a challenge. The opportunity is that they're seeking more content from organizations like Fuente Latina, but it also means that it provides an opportunity to fake news sources like Iran and other extremist actors to get their media and content across as well. But just in terms of experts, going back to the conversation about experts, we trained almost 50 experts this year, more than half of them actually women, as part of our goal. And 40 of them have been interviewed by top Hispanic media outlets. We're talking about Univision, Telemundo, and many others. So the media are utilizing our services, our content, and then the work that we're doing in general is helping empower journalists, which is working towards our mission. So that's our mission.
Wonderful. Congratulations on those awards. Truly meaningful. So you talked a little bit about bringing journalists to Israel, and this is, of course, before the pandemic. I know you led tours for journalists, and some of these tours were specifically for groups of journalists who were women only. Can you explain to us what's the thinking behind a women-only journalist group?
Yes, so it was a very new idea for us, but it actually emerged because in late 2018, of everything that everybody was saying, because it was very televised, the controversy within the women's march, and that there was controversy among some of the Jewish leadership and between other leaders in the movement that were supporting key individuals and leaders that were voicing very anti-Semitic tropes. And the women's movement amongst all women of color and of all women, I believe, it has some sort of impact. And that influence, and particularly the very public display of the fighting between the women over something that was, some were not saying it was anti-Semitic, others were saying it was anti-Semitic. It seemed like it was pitting women against women, coupled with the fact that the women that we bring typically on our trips are some of the more skeptical participants of what they're actually seeing in Israel. And we'll probably speak about that in a minute, about public opinion and how women perceive Israel per se. So with those two things, my team and I got together and thought about, we need to do something specifically targeted towards women to kind of dispel all of what we were seeing. But it also gives us this incredible opportunity because Israel does really have women in all facets of society. And a lot of the times those stories never get to be told. So we organized a trip of women that coincided with International Women's Day, so that we could use that as a kind of a media hook to be able to just focus on female women-related stories, from politicians to musicians to entrepreneurs, women from all walks of life that are in Israel, Hispanic Israelis principally, but also Israelis. And it was an incredible trip. And the content was great, the trip was great, but we were actually scared. We were scared because, when you put a lot of women in a room that don't know each other, it could be very friendly or it could be very unfriendly. And it actually turned out at the beginning that we didn't know that one of the women was a former boss of two of the other women that were on the trip. And apparently it didn't go well. One of the relationships didn't end so well many years ago. By the end of the trip, the bond between those women, and in particular those women that were not speaking to each other prior to the trip, was absolutely amazing. And to this day, I know that they get together at least once a month here in Miami, and that they remain in contact. They continue to contact Fuente Latina. That trip was as impactful for them as it was for us. And it allowed them to see Israel through a softer feminist eye. And it really was the impact, the articles, but also the bond that was created amongst the women and with us was probably the most impactful for me and the most bonding experience that I've seen of all the 50 plus missions that we've brought to Israel to this day.
A wonderful story, Leah. I mean, yes, journalists, of course, are competitive, right? These were people were probably working for competitive media outlets. So that's powerful that you can bring this group together and see that kind of outcome. Just a few moments ago, you mentioned newsrooms closing, and journalism, for a long time now, journalism has been experiencing a broken business model. It's difficult for news operations to stay afloat. Am I correct that you've been seeing an increased desire for content and that you were, that especially during the pandemic. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's really a matter of when journalists had to leave the newsrooms and started reporting from their sofas. They didn't have the access to the producers or the videographers in the field. Resources were cut because publicity, investments, that's the first thing that's cut in a recession. And that meant that a lot of jobs had to be cut, which for us, the second we realized that, we pivoted immediately and just started producing and significantly increasing the amount of production that we were doing. But in doing that, we also started to receive an incredible amount of phone calls from journalists that were desperately looking, not for terrorism experts that we're used to getting or Israel-related experts, but experts in the medical field. And that's what prompted us to start to immediately training medical professionals, men, but particularly women, because in the Hispanic media, if you survey the different top networks, a lot of the key medical professionals that come in and give the analysis of what's the latest going on with COVID typically are men. So this gave us an opportunity to also train and increase the number of women medical professionals all over, both in Mexico, throughout the United States, and the media wanted that and needed that, because within the first couple of weeks they were interviewing the same doctors and the same professionals, and so they need diversity. They want different voices, and so that gave us an opportunity to train Jewish professionals. And as I said before, it's so important that even though they're not talking about anything to do with Judaism or Israel, they're still representatives of the community through their own professional work and obviously their institutions. So for us, it was a great opportunity also to expand our network and still support the needs of the journalists, which is the main purpose of our work.
Excellent, thank you. So Leah, I'd like to spend a few moments now talking about specifically Fuente Latina, the starting and the growing of your organization. I know from my own research of women entrepreneurs, the lack of access to startup capital is a consistent hurdle. Did you experience this, a struggle to have the capital and the resources that you need to launch such a significant organization?
So I was very lucky. I'm just like any other entrepreneur, really. I had to work hard. I had to fight to get to where we are today. In the early days, at the beginning of starting Fuente Latina, as I was transitioning out of the Israel project and laying the groundwork for Fuente Latina, it was definitely a challenge because I was leaving a large institution. And I was going out essentially on my own. And there were some very key investors, many of which are still with Puente Latina today, funders that believed in me and believed in the mission and went with me on the journey of establishing Puente Latina. But that did mean that I had to really prove myself. And like any entrepreneur, it's really hard to gain exposure and new capital, particularly in the early days. And I am very thankful to the Center for Entrepreneurial Jewish Philanthropy that ran kind of sort of venture capitalist shark tanks for Jewish organizations. And I had to fight to get a place on the stage. And I'm glad that I did, because it was the right time, the right philanthropist in the room, and the right pitch. And the pitch is exactly the type of skill sets, the same skill sets actually that we use in pitching to the media. So it was, the stars aligned, and there was a reason for me to be on a stage, a couple of these stages actually, that helped grow Fuente Latina financially, together with the leadership and the staff that helped grow it operationally and through its program. But I do believe that I succeeded early on because of Fuente Latina's really unique selling point. We are quite different than any other organization in the Jewish or pro-Israel kind of environment, and any other really nonprofit or media nonprofit for that matter. So we honestly, as an organization can say no one else is doing the work that we're doing. And I think that selling point, coupled with our proven impact and the results that we're having, is really attractive to any donor, any investor.
Excellent. I can just visualize the pitch that you give on stage as you're talking. So thank you. So are there times when your role as a journalist clashes with your role as a CEO who has to bring in donors and money in other ways, and you have to make difficult business decisions?
So I'll preface by saying we are 100% nonpartisan media organization. But sometimes that doesn't carry over to the world of fundraising, where kind of passions and politics sometimes collide. When I established Fuente Latina, it was one of the first orders of business to ensure that it was non-political. And I think that was actually one of the best decisions I made in building the organization as part of its key core values. I've witnessed over the last year several organizations who lost funding because they took one position versus another that perhaps wasn't favorable with a particular foundation or philanthropist. And that's a very tough position to be in, particularly in the media. Do you tell the story or do you not tell the story for fear of losing funding? And I do find myself constantly analyzing and kind of really studying each story that we publish and weighing whether we are advancing our mission while at the same time fulfilling our commitment to our journalists and to our donors. And the nice thing is with Fuente Latina is that our funders really are our partners, and they're not just one-time investors. They understand the challenge that we have in getting messages about Israel and the Jewish community in the Middle East across to a large, very large, 500 million Spanish-speaking plus audience, and that and they're not always going to be welcoming to our messages and our content. And the fact that we are providing just the facts, not opinions or point of views, is very, very important to our funders, because they know that we're not taking a political position that might jeopardize the relationship. We work really, truly to elevate voices and give exposure to stories that need to be told. And I think that as an objective, together with our position as a nonpartisan media organization, letting the facts speak for themselves is why we're still really going strong today.
Excellent. Thank you, Leah. Now, also in the interviews that I did for my book, when I was talking to women entrepreneurs, a common theme that emerged was that very often they had to either play up or minimize their identities, whether it's their gender, their race or ethnicity, their religion, and they were doing this in order to fit in, as you're describing, when you're making that pitch to people who you're looking for their support. Have you ever felt the need to either emphasize one of your identities or perhaps to let it fade to the background?
Oh, absolutely. I've been in countless meetings like that. I've been in more meetings than I like to count where I'm the only woman, and I've been in more meetings I'd like to count where I've purposely hid my identity as a Jew or as an Israeli. But I think that all of those interactions where I had to put on a different hat or hide a different identity or portray a different identity, this is all part of business. I believe, and I believe that we all have varying degrees of thickness of our shell, and I think mine is pretty thick. The executives and experts and opinion leaders we often work with are really mostly men, and being the sole woman at the table, I a lot of times feel that I have to prove myself. But after a few minutes or throughout the meeting, it's quite clear that I deserve to be there. But to be there, you kind of have to put in a hard exterior persona. But the thick skin that I have from being in these meetings over many, many years, I think, is really what has helped myself and Fuente Latina. It's been quite key to the success and the survival of this organization in the ever-changing media market. So I don't see it as a negative. I do think it has helped me to some degree, but it's unfortunate that in many of those cases I had to hide or diminish, to downplay my identity.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's really fascinating research about this idea of being the only one of a certain kind in a room. You certainly are remembered often when you're an only. Leah, I have one more question I'd like to ask you before we open it up to audience questions. And I see at least one great audience question in the chat. If I can encourage the other audience members to please add your questions if you have them. So Leah, let me ask you, when we were talking, you told me that the majority of your staff and your board are women, but that this wasn't a deliberate decision of yours. So can you tell us, has that made a difference in how you run your organization?
So yeah, it was absolutely an unconscious decision. It really just happened. It was one day somebody asked, I was actually asked in how many women are on within our leadership filling out a grant application. I never thought of it, and then when I started to add up the numbers, I was shocked myself that we are really a women-led organization. Our founding board were 3 women, and today our current leadership is comprised of 5 women and 3 men, and all of our 7 full-time employees, 5 of them are women. And I do think it makes a difference in how the organization is run because women get things done. And I think that's true to the success of Fuente Latina. Women are really the driving force of the organization, our men as well. But I think it makes us a much more well-oiled machine.
Wonderful, thank you. Dalia, are you coming back to join us?
I am here. And I wanted to thank you both for just such an interesting conversation. Leah, I think that Fuente Latina is a pathbreaker in so many ways. And I can't think of a better person to have joined us in the conversation than Susanne, who is herself, her background in journalism, her expertise in media and entrepreneurship, and specifically also with the gender lens. So it's such an honor to host you both, and thank you for this engaging conversation. And yes, I'm excited to jump in and open it up for Q&A, and we're starting to get some great questions. And before I do so, I wanted to just jump in with a few questions, actually first to Susanne and then to Leah, and then we'll proceed to the Q&A. So first to you, Susanne, with your research in your book, you make the argument that society needs more women entrepreneurs, more people like Leah, actually. And I wonder if you could speak to the practical societal benefits if that were achieved, if more women entrepreneurs were successful, and what kind of change that would bring.
Of course, thank you, yes. So many entrepreneurial ventures are inspired by an unmet need that the entrepreneur is experiencing themselves or seeing in their community. When Leah was telling us the founding story of Fuente Latina, she talked about, I saw something that was missing, and I knew that I was the person to fill that. So that is such a common thing that you hear from entrepreneurs. So that leads us to the recognition that when we have a diverse group of people pursuing entrepreneurial ventures with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different identities, when that happens, then it's more likely that we'll have new businesses, new organizations that address a variety of needs. In my book, I give several examples of this where an entrepreneur spotted a need that others had previously ignored. 2 examples that are my favorites. I talked to a team in Chicago who launched a platform that crowdsources reports of drug effectiveness and side effects from people of color. And this is because clinical trials, so often the medications are tested on white patients. Another story that I included, there's an entrepreneur here in Massachusetts who created a jewelry charm. And if you flip to the back of the charm, there is a secret button. And if you press that button, it will call the police and a small number of your contacts, your friends and your family. And so the idea is that you press this button if you are ever in danger and you need to call for help. And she developed this idea while she was a college student and was walking home at night alone and feeling unsafe. So, these are examples of people seeing something missing in their world and saying, I'm the person to address that. And I'll note in a lot of these cases, the entrepreneurs go to investors and try to raise funds, and they struggle to convince the investors that there is really a market or there's really a need. And that speaks to our pressing need to have diverse investors in the United States. If you have a diverse pool of investors, they will invest in a diverse group of entrepreneurs. And I'll make one more point about this need for more women entrepreneurs. A group of researchers have estimated that if women-founded startups were launched at the same rate as startups, high-growth startups launched by men, if this happened, we would have 15 million additional jobs in this country in 2 years. So this is significant. Of course, for us to recover from the pandemic, to rebuild the economy, create new businesses and create new jobs, we're going to need full entrepreneurial participation. No one can be sitting on the sidelines.
These are such great points. Needs are not being met because they're not being recognized, and those that can recognize the need are not often in position to fund it. And that also has a snowball effect then on the economy and lost opportunities in so many ways. And this leads me actually to the fact that you just published this groundbreaking book. And a question that I have for you actually relates to a piece that you wrote to Fortune magazine, that women and people of color not only face obstacles to becoming entrepreneurs, as you were just speaking about, but that they also have fewer opportunities to write books about their successes. And I'm wondering if you could also speak to that publishing aspect of the snowball effect.
Sure, yes. So I dug through the data on the top 200 best-selling business books in the United States for last year. And when I looked at the data for the top 200 books, only 17 of those books had women authors. And so just out of curiosity, I said, well, okay, 17 women authors. How many authors are men with the name of John? And there were 17 with the name of John. So the same number of women authors as authors with the name of John. And I should also note that so you have a small number of women authors. These authors who are women are overwhelmingly white. So women of color are left out of this publishing picture in a significant way. So what this means is if you are in the business section of a bookstore or the business section of a library, you're going to mostly see on the shelves books by white men. And this is not specific to 2020. It's a long-running issue in the publishing world and the book selling world. And what this does, this helps perpetuate the idea that men make the best CEOs. Men are the true leaders. Men have this innovative spark that others are lacking. It reinforces these tired stereotypes. So the solution to this is simple. It's going to be hard, but we simply need to publish more business books and business viewpoints from women, from people of color. So the publishing industry has a role in publishing more of these books, but we have roles as readers and as consumers to buy these books and talk about these books and give these books as gifts. I'm hoping Leah has a book in her future, which I would love to buy. But so it's important for people to see these authors as role models and to learn from these authors.
Yes. And I remember listening to an interview of yours on NPR, Susanne. I happened to be in the car actually when it came on live. I think I told you. And Tatiana Deering, right? I think she quoted The Room Where It Happens, right? This famous line by Hamilton. And I think that we need people that look different ways, that have different backgrounds, and to not be the only one in the room where it happens, so that people can imagine imagine that room could be filled with people that look different than themselves, right? And the them is not all homogenous. And so thank you for that, Susanne. And actually, a funny story is that I have an entrepreneur friend that could use your book. So I loaned it to her and then quickly ran out to the library to make sure I had a fresh one. So it's also in your local library, but Susanne also encourages people to go to your local bookstore to purchase hers and any other books, which I like. And you can look up also which ones are owned by women, people of color. So that's something, the consumer has power as well. And so I wanted to turn to you. One thing that came up in our conversations ahead of time that I wanted to make sure that we addressed is that you please speak to your choice in the company name.
So yeah, that was another very interesting fact that emerged when we were developing the ideas for this conversation. I did about 2 months of just like immersing myself in the Hispanic media digital market, doing a lot of research. I wanted something that appealed to the media, but to a wider Hispanic audience. And what the word that kept sticking in my mind that I really wanted to use was Puente. Puente has a dual meaning. It means source, which I wanted it to reference source of information, but it also means fountain, as a source of water. And since fountain is kind of an important gathering spot in historical places, not only in the Middle East, but also in Latin America, and in Spain as well, in Ibero-America, I went with Puente, and Puente actually sounds masculine, but it's feminine. And that's why it's not Puente Latino, but it's Puente Latina. So grammatically, it's correct. But I also had never thought of it from that perspective as well. That it's actually a feminine name, but its meaning rings true.
Awesome. I love good job with the name. I think it's fantastic. So I have two questions that are somewhat related from the audience. One is, and these are to Leah actually, one has to do with the way in which Israelis in Latin America, which is not something we've talked about that much, from Latin America, so Latin Americans that have immigrated to Israel, how are they represented or active in the Israeli media? That's one question. And the other is, what types of stories about Israel are most popular with Latino audiences? So there are two different questions, but you're thinking about, right, the Latino presence in the Israeli media and also the Israeli presence in the Latino media. So if you could speak to both of those separately.
I can. So to answer the first question, Latinos, Latin Americans, Latin American immigrants to Israel are very well represented and accurately represented in the Israeli media. And that's because Latin Americans that have immigrated to Israel, I believe they're at least in the top 5 immigrant groups in terms of population. They're one of the largest immigrant populations that exist in Israel. And they are, I think, some of the best assimilated, meaning they've learned Hebrew, they are in every field that you can think of in Israel, including now in the upcoming 4th election of Israel in the last 2 years. In one of the new parties, there's actually 2 Argentinians who are running for members of Knesset. One of them is the key contender against the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So you have Hispanics in every walk of life in Israel, from teachers, judges, doctors who are saving lives. And on the weekend, they're dancing salsa, they're having asados, and they're speaking Spanish to their family back home in Latin America or with their kids. So they retain their language and their culture, while at the same time becoming part of the existing fabric, colorful fabric that is Israel. And it's very interesting because in Israel, Israelis love Latino culture, love it, love it, love it, love it. To the extent of many Israelis after the army go traveling, backpacking throughout Latin America, but also Israelis in general, they love the Latin culture, and they particularly have, I wouldn't call it a obsession, but a very, very keen interest in telenovelas. So the fact that there are 2 channels in Israel dedicated to telenovelas. And I can't tell you how many times I've been with journalists or leaders or visitors in Israel. We walk into, the foreign minister, walk into a restaurant, you walk into like places you're never going to expect to meet a Spanish speaker. And these young Israelis hear us speak Spanish, say, hablas español. And the person I'm with will just be like, what? And I say, are you your parents Latino? No, I watch telenovelas. I learned from the telenovelas. I've never been to Latin America, but they speak enough Spanish to be able to carry on a light conversation. And that's pretty interesting. A lot of Israeli music, also duets with a lot of Hispanic artists. Most recently, there was one with the Israeli group called Static and People. So there's a lot of kind of this mutual love, I think, between Hispanics and Israel, and in particular Hispanic Israelis, I believe are accurately portrayed in the Israeli media. But going back to what Hispanics like, what are the most popular stories about Israel? The number one most popular story that we find resonates best, there are several, but the ones that really impact and that make the front news and that get the most reaction are stories of Hispanic immigrant success in Israel. When we profile different Hispanic immigrants, obviously you cannot compare the situation between a Hispanic immigrant to Israel or any other country around the world. So that's absolutely not the approach that we take, but we look at which country they come from, how they struggle like every immigrant to learn the language, to get adjusted, to assimilate to some degree, to find a job. And when we talk about these stories, because if you ask most Hispanics, they don't even know that there are Hispanics, Latin Americans in Israel. They have no idea. So to hear that there are immigrants in what is known as Tierra Santa, the Holy Land for them, is incredible. These stories are the stories that really we time and time again, journalists come back and they want they want to know about Cubans in Israel. They want to know about Puerto Ricans in Israel, Mexicans in Israel. This is a feel-good story that everybody wants to publish, because they know that it's going to resonate with their audience. And the other reason, or the other stories that really have a huge impact, particularly with the growing Christian evangelical audience, is anything regarding Tierra Santa. Most Hispanics they were brought up they were brought up Catholic, but now they second, third generation statistics show are becoming atheist or Protestant, evangelical, and regardless of their religion or their beliefs, or if they're going to church or not, it's always been as part of like their family belief. They're speaking to their grandmother. A memory is the desire on behalf of a family member to go to Tierra Santa. And when they can go to Israel, whether as a tourist or a journalist, it's fulfilling a lifelong family dream. And so any stories that relate to kind of that pilgrimage, stories of Latinos in Tierra Santa, something a story that, or a video or an interview that helps Hispanics kind of get an access to it from far away are stories that are always popular.
That's really, it's quite interesting. And there was another question that brings us back to before getting back to the entrepreneurial part, that's about the content. That was asking about different content that you see resonates with women audience members rather than men. And I understand that, you're not targeting a certain one gender over the other, but you had mentioned that there's certain ways that certain topics land differently, that you've been able to notice.
Well, it's topics, yes, but in general, we've done public opinion surveys and other organizations that have done so in the past. And in general, not only Hispanic women, in general, women tend to be more negative regarding Israel because of what they've seen in the media over the years. So, you know, when the questions we get before journalists come, and you think journalists, they know, they're reading, they're watching the news all day, they must understand that you don't need to put on a burqa to go to Israel, which are real questions that we get from journalists. Or journalists will decline a trip because they say that their mothers think it's too dangerous. You know, these are real realities, and the surveys show this, that women, it's not that they have any other prejudice against Israel, but women are mothers. And if they're constantly seeing negative images in the media, they believe it's a place of conflict, a place of danger. And also a lot of other feedback we received is it was perceived because of the pictures of the more men are being interviewed than women, is that it's a male-dominated society, and that women don't have all the rights. They confuse Israel with the rest of the Middle East. And so the need to have women and Jews of color in the media to dispel these misperceptions is absolutely imperative. And women are, and studies unrelated to Israel show women are the decision makers. And the opinion of a woman can impact her entire family, that of her colleagues at work. And if you take that a step further, you know, there are a lot of Hispanic women now in the United States, young women in particular. Young and women are our most challenging audiences in terms of Israel and the Jewish community. And what happens is, with those images, and if you look at some really incredible up and coming Hispanic leaders, particularly political leaders, that have a very, very, very important voice, and whose opinion is very closely followed. And when those misperceptions seep into political positions and statements vis-a-vis Israel or the Jewish community, there's a trickle-down effect. We know in the media that there's a direct correlation between negative images of Israel and increase in anti-Semitic attacks. And the fear is that with this newer, younger generation, and particularly of women that are more skeptical, less open, and are more negative towards Israel, that it's going to have an impact in the relationships, and in their views, and in their voting patterns, and in the relationships in general. You know, even their desire to go to Israel. I mean, all of this impacts, from politics to economy to national security. The perceptions of our community all really matter.
And I think it's so interesting to think about all of these different elements. And I think that I'd like to end with going back to your role as a Latina Jewish entrepreneur, and follow that up with a question actually to Susanne, in your capacity as a professor at Emerson College and a mentorship role. So first to Leah, and then to Susanne, and I'll let you two take the final questions. But when towards you, Leah, was, what is the most difficult setback that you've had to overcome as a Jewish Hispanic woman in the entrepreneurial world? And the question that I'd like to ask Susanne is, how have you seen in your students, Emerson College is one that really fosters creativity and entrepreneurship among all of their students. And from your vantage point as a professor and as a mentor, do you see how the world in front of them is already speaking to and affecting the young women that have come across your classes and into your classroom? So Leah, maybe if you wanted to go first.
So I'm thinking about the question. I think honestly, I wouldn't say there was any major setback in close to 10 years of Fuente Latina. I will say one of the challenges, which kind of acts as a setback a lot of the times, is that we don't fit in any particular bucket. If you look at the nonprofit kind of organization world, Are you Jewish? Are you pro-Israel? Are you media? Are you advocacy? And sometimes we have a hard time opening the door in certain realms because we don't fit any one kind of definition. We kind of transgress all of them, and that's what makes us unique. And we're really finding our stride now within the non-Jewish media Hispanic world. More and more, particularly as a result of the pandemic, profit newsrooms are quickly now changing to nonprofit news models, which Fuente Latina already is one. And so that allows us to build new relationships, key relationships with non-Jewish, Hispanic media and non-Hispanic media organizations, as well as up and coming progressive non-Jewish Latina organizations, which are growing, are increasingly having a much more important voice in the United States. So those setbacks allow us to re-strategize and find our way, but I believe that all of it is for a reason and a positive one.
Wonderful, thank you, Leah.
So you mentioned Emerson. Emerson does, the student body at Emerson is very entrepreneurial in their unique way, especially, we're primarily an arts and communications school, but there's still a lot of entrepreneurial activity that goes on. I have served as a mentor and advisor to students starting startups while they're still students at Emerson. It just happened that they are all women so far. So I have had the benefit of having that front row seat to see what they're interested in. They're very aware of what's going on in the world, and I can see a strong interest in social entrepreneurship. So this is, devising new businesses, new organizations that especially hope to do some kind of good in the world and make a difference. And what I think is noteworthy, not only do they want these ventures that they're building to be doing something important in the world, they just want to be a business person who runs a decent business. They talk to me a lot about wanting to promote work-life balance for their employees. They want to have fair wages. They want to give back to the community. I love to hear all of this, and so that's something that I really hope picks up steam in the coming decades. That entrepreneurs have this desire to merge extreme business success with an idea of doing good and giving back and building up everyone.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on than that. So thank you to you both, Susanne, and to Leah. This has been such an informative and really mind-opening conversation. Such an honor to have you both join us tonight. And as we wrap up, I wanted to invite everyone to join us next week. On Wednesday, we actually are hosting another talk, this time with sociologist Laura Limonique, who will be talking about the Latino and Latina Jewish presence in the US today. And then coming up February 22nd and March 11th, we'll turn to Iberian Jewry and exploring the end of Iberian Jewry right before the expulsion, and then its legacy in crypto Judaism. So that is coming up. It includes a film viewing. So just check out our website and you can register for all. It is all free, thanks to our generous supporters. So we invite you to join us for the rest of spring. This is such a great way to kick it all off. And also we are providing the websites of both Fuente Latina and Susanne Althoff as well, so you can learn more about them and their work. And with that, I bid everyone good night, buenas noches, and Laila Tov.